Well, welcome everybody to our first panel for Color Fandom VCon 2024. I am so excited to have Michael Williams with me today, but this is actually Michael's panel. So I am happy that he is having me on his panel. So just to make that clear, for those of you who don't know me, I am Donna Eason. I am the founder of Color Fandom. I am a tremendous geek and I love all things horror, especially Hellraiser related and sci-fi. So Michael, if you can introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Sure thing. My husband watched all the Hellraiser movies
Me
last
too.
year.
Oh, really? I did
And
the same
yeah,
thing.
and just like loved them. Just loved them.
Yeah. He loved
That
even the
is,
bad ones, right?
oh yeah.
Yeah.
His take is there basically aren't bad ones.
Yeah, that's me.
Um, but I love the Hellraiser universe. Oh gosh.
Oh yeah.
I'm Michael G. Williams. I write queer themed horror, science fiction, and urban fantasy. I write novels, novellas, and short stories. Got a sci-fi horror short story coming out in an anthology in a few weeks, an anthology called Nevermore from Falstaff Books. And currently I am querying what, depending on when it comes out, will be my 12th or 13th novel, which is an Appalachian cosmic horror novel about queer characters up in the mountains.
All
And
right.
I co-host Arc in Carolinas, a podcast about legends and lore and hidden history and all kinds of fun stuff from North and South Carolina.
All right, well, great. Okay. Well, Michael, the fact that this is your panel, I am I am going to actually sit back more than I usually do and then, be a jump in here and, whenever. But this is the panel on seeing ourselves. So can you actually, if you don't mind, because you sent this panel idea to us, can you tell us why this one was important for you?
Sure. So, like at a lot of conventions, I've had the opportunity to talk with other people about circumstances in which we don't see good representation of ourselves, for whatever our identities and experiences are, whatever that means for each of us. There's a lot of conversation around what gets it wrong out there and what do we find disappointing in the stuff that we watch. And so we really wanted to create an opportunity for us to basically recommend good stuff to each other and say what is it that makes good representation, because people who are creative may really benefit from hearing from that for their own writing, their own video projects, their own whatever, whatever their art is. It's probably helpful to them to hear from people what makes good rep, and also for us to just recommend to each other stuff that makes good representation, stuff that we are thrilled to see more of, stuff where we really see ourselves, because I think that it's worthwhile to examine when we feel like we are seen in something, what is it about that that drew us, so that we can find more stuff like that and we can help create a world in which more stuff like that gets made. I think
Yeah.
that's a really valuable exercise. That it can also provide some insights into us and what our own experience is.
Actually, when I saw this idea and asked you, could I be a part of it? I was thinking about when I see myself represented, and then I started thinking about all of my identifiers. There were certain things that jumped up initially, like I was thinking about a Black woman, but then I started looking more into my, age and looking into body type and looking into, all of these other areas, socioeconomic or something like that. And so I really started seeing more and more um, stories that I really appreciated. I didn't really understand it at the time I saw it or read it or anything like that. But after a while, I was like, oh, I know why that touched me in a way. It was because I could understand that character. I saw myself in that character. So I appreciate having the chance to look at this topic.
Yeah, this is something my therapist and I talk about all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Is stuff when we look at whatever we consume, whether it's a TV show or a movie or a comic book or a book.
Mhm.
or music, whenever we consume culture, if we find ourselves in that culture, that's a really important form of validation. And it's
Mhm.
not always something that we expect, and it doesn't always occur for reasons of which we're conscious. And
Mhm.
so it's just like I feel like when we have the opportunity to highlight something that made us really feel included, that's a good thing.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
also is an opportunity for us to tell each other things about ourselves.
Yeah.
It's a way for other people to learn more about who we are when we share what it is we think represents us well.
Mhm. This is one thing that we definitely do. I teach English, and to high schoolers. And so what we have done over the years at my school is make sure we're very inclusive in our text. So when I started off 20 years ago teaching English at the school, we taught a lot of old white men. And now I think at least in the 10th grade, we teach no old white men. There's so many other identities that we're exploring, and I remember being asked by a parent, why don't y'all read this book or that book or these books that are canon and classic and everybody should know them? And I had to push back. I said, well, why do you feel everybody should know this book? And isn't it more important for a student to feel as if they are seen, and they can connect to the story rather than a story that for them to learn just because you have been told it was an important text. And so it made us really question, why are these books the books that are important to teach, and
Yeah.
it makes you think of gatekeepers, and it makes you think of all of that type of thing. And so we've decided, very actively to change our program, and it's been for the better. So I love looking at how we connect to stories. And
Yeah.
even when the character is not our race or religion or gender, you know, that we still can see ourselves in that character too. And appreciate the fact that that character is being and that group of people is being represented.
Yeah. One of the things when people like focus on the classics, quote unquote,
Mhm.
then they're really setting up two bad experiences. And one of them is that people with marginalized identities and experiences are not going to see themselves in those stories, or if they do, they're not going to see themselves presented in a positive light. And
Mhm.
so it starts to make them feel that because the past never included them, then maybe the future will never include us also. And I
Mhm.
think that is for a lot of people who, I was originally going to be a teacher. And
Mhm.
this was a conversation that I had with a professor of mine about curriculum design at the time. And, but it's just, it's very easy for people to sort of unconsciously create an impression in a student that they are, or any young person, that they're just not included in the
Right.
world,
Mhm.
past or future.
Mhm.
But also, I think that like having grown up as a white kid in a school that had 900 students and like 10 of them were not also white,
Mhm.
it really did not challenge the monoculture that I was growing up in a
Mhm.
way that I think would have been really good for me and really good for a lot of my classmates at the time. We just
Mhm.
didn't, we weren't presented with material that told us that the world outside of the little place where we were growing up
Mhm.
was more diverse than that place. It did not prepare us to like live in a world where there are people other than ourselves in a way that we really need to prepare kids and teach kids that not everybody in the world is like them and that they can celebrate that that's not a thing that they need to like be wary of or afraid of. That's a
Mhm.
great goodness, and it's a real privilege and a benefit to be exposed to cultures other than themselves, whoever they are, in a way
Mhm.
that I my high school education was very much, and my college education were very much about the classics, and
Mhm.
so we just like we didn't receive that sort of instruction. We didn't, it was the job of the educational institution to teach us that the world was more complicated than we had experienced ourselves,
Mhm.
and it wasn't living up to that.
Mhm. One of the things that I've really appreciated with my class this year is we just finished a book called They're There, that talks about the experience of today. So it's a very contemporary book, but Native Americans in America, obviously in America. And what it did was when we started reading about it, the question was, why haven't we read this type of story before? And students had to really think about it. And it was very interesting how at first they were saying, well, because, these stories are the experiences of these characters, or even historically, is so horrendous that's the reason why we didn't learn about it, because it was too hard to teach young people. I said, but wait a minute, you all learned about World War II. You get a whole lot of that, that story, but you don't get a lot of, America pre Civil War, actually, almost. And people who existed on this land way before, other people. And so they really had to think about the fact that that's because the narrative wanted to be driven a certain way. And that's why you don't get that story. It's not because people think it's too much for you to handle. It's because people want to guide you to believe a certain thing. And so that opened up a lot of conversation with students. And that's what I appreciate about the fact that when you expose them to something they haven't been exposed to before, they don't shut down. They don't turn away from it. They want to know that. Now there's pain, of course, in knowing it, but they appreciate that. And so I'm lucky that they get to show me that, because they teach me something about this too.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
It's just a lot of times the powers that be are not comfortable with the fact that a more diverse education would cause people to question the choices of the powers that be.
Yes.
You know,
That's what that is.
yeah. I specifically did not become a teacher in the end because one of my professors, who I really loved, two of them actually,
Mhm.
sat me down together and said, "You're going to be a great teacher until they fire you, and that'll take about 5 minutes." So,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I was like, "Okay, yeah, he probably got a good point." All of my like sample lessons were way too
Hmm.
controversial, we'll say.
Right. But
Um,
the students would have loved you.
I like to think so. I don't
Yes.
know. That's
So
for an
would you
alternate timeline to answer.
so would you like to talk about some of your favorites and where you
Yeah.
feel that people are being seen?
Yes.
Okay.
So for me, I was looking at it from the perspective of like, where do I see what I consider good queer representation? And
Mhm.
I want to caveat that like this is what I consider good queer representation, because there are a lot of queer people who are different from me and they may have a different definition of that. But for me, I need to see first and foremost a multitude of queer identities, so that there is not like one queer character who has to be the ambassador for all of us and
Mhm.
who has to bear the burden of all of us and who has to be the exemplar for all of us and has to either be perfect or has to be pitied. That when there's one queer character, they have to be one or the other.
Yeah.
And so I like a lot of them so that we can have a range of roles to play in a story.
Mhm.
I also really like it when a story focuses on the less privileged and less frequently spotlighted queer identities, like a story that has good asexual representation or good aromantic representation, or pansexuals or intersex people or bisexuals who are often invisible in stories like this, in any sort of story. Um, they're either invisible or they're, like really gay or whatever.
Mhm.
And so stories where they're like good, strong bisexual characters who just get to be bisexual and nobody expects them to choose, things like that.
Mhm.
It's like I'm a white cisgender gay dude. I have all the privilege in the queer community in a lot of ways, and there are plenty of stories about people like me. So I want to see stories about other queer identities so that we can all be celebrated and all get time in the spotlight. I also need queer characters who don't have to be nice. they don't have to be the like supportive neighbor. They don't have to basically be there to pat the cisheads on the arm and tell them it's going to be okay,
Be
you
the
know,
best
whatever.
friend.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't need them to be the gay best friend. I don't,
Mhm.
you know, there are enough of those stories out there. Um, but also, and this is something that like other queer people don't always agree with, and that's great. That's okay.
Mhm.
I kind of do need queer characters who are dealing with trauma,
Mhm.
and they don't have to be like trauma bombs. They don't have to be melodramatic, but in order for me to feel seen, I kind of need their queerness to matter in some way
Mhm.
to their character. And in a lot of, and it's just reality that in a lot of ways our queerness matters and how we have experienced trauma as a result of it.
Mhm.
Um, I just kind of need them to be more than just like they just happen to be queer characters. If I'm going to feel like I'm seen.
Mhm.
That said, I really love stories where characters just get to be queer and their queerness is not the source of like pain.
Mhm.
You know, and an example that I guarantee we're going to talk about being Star Trek Discovery, where there are a bunch of queer characters, a bunch of queer identities, and none of them appear to have grown up in a world where their queerness was the problem.
Right.
And that is so good. That is so optimistic, and I love it. I love stories where queerness gets to just be a source of strength,
Mhm.
you know, where it gets to be a source of something better in them rather than a source of pain. So I really love that. And I think a lot of times queer stories about younger queer characters or by younger queer creators
Mhm.
get to celebrate that in a way that like just doesn't come out of my experience. So I really value getting to hear from younger queer people about their experience because their experience is very different from mine.
Mhm.
And I really want to celebrate that. And um and I kind of need queer characters who are kind of like a mess. I need queer characters who are just super messy. I love that. I love it when queer characters just don't have to be perfect. They get to
Right.
just be characters. They get to just have problems and be messes, and sometimes just be awful, and that's okay, you know. And their awfulness isn't about their queerness either. That's really important to me.
Mhm.
So some examples. The first one I'm going to list is Good Omens,
Oh, I
especially
love Good Omens. Yeah.
right? Like it's so good. It's
Mhm.
so good. And there are a bunch of different queer identities, especially in the second series. There are a variety of romantic entanglements. There's a variety of sexualities present within
Yeah.
queer representation there. Um, Not everybody gets a happily ever after, which I think is really important because this is not, they're not tidy stories in which queerness gets wrapped up in a bow and the credits roll and everything is over. Um, and yet they're like really engaging stories about really complicated characters. And we want to see them all succeed, even though they don't all want the same things, even from each other. And I think that's a really important part for me of good rep
Mhm.
is seeing characters who don't all want the same things, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
it's just a really good example of how if you have a variety of characters under one umbrella, then those characters get to be more diverse. They get to be more fully realized as people. They get to want different stuff. They get to have different experiences. They don't have to be the sole emblem of whatever their identity is.
Yeah. And I just love how the a long-term relationship is how that is portrayed. You know, the mundane aspects of a long-term relationship, you know, and the exciting. And then when you're mad at each other, and then when you know, everything is not, the drama is not heightened all the time because that's not life. And relationships don't last all the time just for a week, you know, a high
Yeah,
passionate fast week. Sometimes it's over years. And what does this look like over years? And so I really like that in the story.
I love that they're. I love that the two main characters get to have had basically 6,000 years of will they, won't they?
Yes.
And
Everybody
then it,
around them is like, come on. Yeah.
right, you know, and then that's okay. You
It
know, I love
is. It
that.
is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just I don't know. I love that they uh I love that they're characters that they're queer characters whose point is not I need to find somebody so that we can be pitiful together, you
Yeah.
know, because there's a lot of queer storytelling around that.
Mm,
And they're characters who really have drawn strength from each other. And
yeah.
I think that's so wonderful. But I
Mhm,
also love the storyline in the second season about the shopkeeper and
mhm.
the woman who owns the coffee shop, and just like
Yes.
what a mess of a story that is, and how much I
Mhm,
love those characters, you know.
mhm.
Oh,
Definitely.
so good. Um, what's one that you love?
One, I actually have shows that it may be a season or an episode
That's awesome.
that stands out to me. I will go back to Walking Dead season, I think 4.
Hmm.
So I believe season 4 was a season where we might have had 7 or 8 main characters, and maybe 5 of those characters were Black. And it's very rare, just like you were saying, you want more than just that one person that has to be the token or the representative for a whole group of people. And the more people you have of a group, then you could see the diversity within the group. And so you really saw that definitely in this particular season of Walking Dead, because there were the Black people in the group in that season were very different, um, and had different things that they were focusing on or different beliefs. And I got to see myself. I was able to identify with little bits and pieces of all of these characters, because that, to me, that is what people are. They're not just one, stereotype or this one archetype. And so that's one that really stood out for me. Another, and also in addition to the show, now Walking Dead, I kind of didn't watch the later seasons, but I did play the Telltale games. Now there's the good and the bad with this first season of the Walking Dead Telltale game. Lee is the main character, who's a Black man. There are some stereotypical elements to him that
Mm,
they were a little irritating, in the fact that here's a man who got out of jail, so they had to tie in prison with this character. The
yeah,
good thing is you are that character. So you identify, you grow a connection with the character. And I did appreciate, as the game went on, being able to feel like I'm definitely understanding this character. And then in later series of the game, you may be a Latino man, you may be a biracial girl, you may be a Black woman. I don't think you are ever a white man, which is what in most games, that's what you've had to play.
yeah,
So I think Walking Dead just did a really good job in different media, trying to be as diverse and inclusive as possible. And I think that a reflection of what we get on the screen or in games is also reflected in the writers' room, because I think they had more diversity on their team. And so it kind of came across.
yeah. In reading the comics, I
Mhm.
I checked out on the comics in the middle of the prison storyline,
Yeah.
where they were in the prisons they had reclaimed.
Hmm.
And but at the time, and I might be misremembering because I read those a long time ago,
Yeah.
but I remember at the time thinking that the first time we meet a high concentration of African American characters is when they go to a prison. And I was like, this is set in Georgia and they're not seeing Black people?
Yeah.
Like, that's ridiculous. It's set in the
Mhm.
South and it's just a bunch of white people.
Mhm.
So that really bothered me. But then I read far enough for Michaud to show up. And I was
Mhm.
like, okay, I think he realized he had written a problem
Well, he
because,
actually, to me, even in the comics were much more problematic to me than the
yeah,
show. I think the show fixed some things, but Michonne's character was problematic in the comics. Ty, uh, Tyrese's character was kind of a problem. You know, there were some problematic areas there. So it seemed like the show was trying to fix some things. Yeah.
Yeah. And I respect especially, and this is I won't be able to see the remakes and reimaginings panel tomorrow, but
Hmm.
I love that that panel exists. And I'm going to watch it afterwards if I can.
Hmm.
But uh, that's one of the things that I think a remake has the chance to do, to
Yeah.
see a problem and fix it, you know.
Hmm.
So I loved that. I was really happy to see that the TV show seemed to have a much more diverse set of characters.
Yeah. Hmm. So what's another one for you?
Star Trek Discovery. Let's just spend the rest
Yeah.
of the hour talking about Star Trek
Oh,
Discovery
we
and how
could do
great it
that
is.
easily.
I know. I literally started to propose just a panel to talk about how great Rep is in Star Trek Discovery.
Oh yeah.
But
Um,
like, I mean, queer fam forever in Star Trek
mhm,
Discovery. It is just
mhm,
like wall to wall queer people who care about each other and all of their friends. And it
mhm.
is just like found family. It
Oh
is
yeah.
all the things that I love.
Hmm.
Uh, I love the fact that Stamets and Reno get to be
Yeah.
queer characters who are kind of jerks. And that's just who they are, and they don't
Mhm,
have to like spend all the time being nice and apologizing. They
mhm.
just are who they are, you know, and that's just the way it is. I really a stereotype that I love is that a lesbian will just tell you what's up, you know, that they're not going to waste time bullshitting people. Oh,
Uh-huh.
I don't know if that's okay for me to say,
Yes, it
but
is.
okay. Um, but they're like, they're just not going to waste time on that
Mhm.
kind of garbage. And I love Reno as a character who will
Me
just
too.
tell people what the deal is and like point out to people really obvious problems in what they're
Mhm.
doing and be right, you know? I just like, I really love her as a character. I also think that they, especially those two characters, do a really good job at various points of sort of embodying the queer experience of loss
Mhm.
without it being an AIDS story.
Mhm.
So like there are parts of the queer experience there that I think a lot of different queer identities can really connect with, of having people gone from your life for one reason or another.
Mhm.
And maybe that's because, you know, somebody came out or transitioned and there were people who revealed themselves as being bigoted. And so the relationship fell by the wayside. Maybe it's because they like literally lost people. Maybe it's because in their experience, it was, you know, an experience of losing somebody to AIDS. But regardless, I think that queer people sort of acutely feel loss when we experience it, in part because so many of our relationships have been so, the relationships in which we're really allowed to be ourselves are so precious.
Yeah.
So I like that they get to have scenes where they talk about loss and talk about grief and
Mhm.
talk about like being difficult to love because they're such difficult people, you know, and I just think that's really, really beautiful.
Mhm.
Um, but also that's another show where there's a huge spectrum of queer identities on the
Yeah.
show, and they're
Mhm.
all valid, they're all validated, they're all
Mhm.
explicitly welcomed into the story. And I think that that's so important. It explicitly welcomes the viewer into the world as well. And I just feel like it's so beautiful to see so many different types of queer characters really get to express their own queerness without without it having to be again about being pitied or anything
Right.
like that. Um, even in season four, my husband was pointing out the other day that the mad scientist character, whose name I can't remember because
Oh
names
yes. Hmm.
land for me,
Hmm.
and Book, when he's telling Book about his experience of being in prison, he has this
Right.
person who's really important to him, and he's trying to
Hmm.
get back to that person. That's never an explicitly sexual relationship, as far as we know. And
Right.
so that opens up the possibility that that's an asexual relationship that
Hmm.
isn't like, doesn't have a big sign hanging over it saying ace rep, but at the
Right.
same time, it doesn't not, you know,
Right.
be that. And importantly, the show is never super interested in like cracking that open and dissecting it and labeling it. They
Hmm.
just tell us people care about each other for reasons that we don't always necessarily share. And that's okay. It's okay for people to care about each other. It's even
Hmm.
okay for people to care about each other so much that it might drive them to do terrible things. But
Right.
like, but it never says in the show that it was bad that he cared. It
Right,
says in the show that it's bad that he made bad choices after that.
right.
And I think that that's a really important form of queer validation also, to just say to people, like, wanting what you want is okay, you know?
Hmm.
And I feel like Star Trek Discovery does an amazing job of that.
And it's so touching. I mean, this found family, this whole family unit coming together with these kids, with these parents. I mean, that part was just, would bring a tear to your eye.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think every person I know wishes they could be part of that family,
Oh
you know?
gosh, yes. A
Yeah,
great family.
yeah.
One Star Trek definitely for me also with representation as it relates to race. Another show, and this show did a lot of things wrong. So I'm going to talk about a very specific episode, and this is
Okay.
Lovecraft Country, and it's the episode I Am, and it is when the character Hippolyta, we see her decide to do her, she's a wife and a mother, and neither of those are who she is really. These are aspects of her, but they're not really who she really is. And that episode is really about this middle-aged Black woman is able to be herself. She is very brilliant. She's a math person. She wants to seek adventure, find out who she is, to the point where she leaves her family. And I really like seeing that type of representation. So many times you see women have to be a wife or a mother, or they have to be supporting someone else. And in that episode, she is discovering herself, her sexuality, she's discovering her strength, what she's interested in, and to the point where she does decide to go back to her family, but not before she has had all of these experiences. So putting herself first, I appreciated seeing that and not demonizing a woman for doing that. Um, Also, we have a woman who is not what a lot of Hollywood would consider having the body shape of a woman who would be scantily dressed. And we get to see her in very little, and she's a beautiful woman. We get to see her in very few clothing materials. And I like seeing that, I am not a woman who is a size two, but that doesn't mean that women who are different body sizes or different ages are not sexy women or sensual women or passionate or attractive or anything like that. And so I always want to see um, a diversity of women in these types of passionate, sexy roles, and not always 20 years old or 30 years old or a size two or something like that. I want to see, people who are middle to late. I'm moving into the crone years of my life now. I don't think of myself as now I'm just a woman who needs to be in a cave with a cane. So there's a lot of life left. And I like seeing those portrayals. Also, we get to see that in The Equalizer with Queen Latifah. I love seeing, once again, we see strength in women. We also have a character in her aunt who is a woman who doesn't have kids. Now, she is an aunt to a girl, but oftentimes we also don't see women who are very happy in their lives and don't have children, or not married.
Yeah.
And I like seeing women, I don't have any kids, so I like seeing women who have very fulfilled lives and are around my age and don't have kids, so or I'm married, but the characters in the story are not married. And I like seeing that happiness and that passion that they have. And marriage and kids are not necessarily the things you need to have a fulfilled older life. So those are two of my favorites.
And in all of those, that's an instance of a show explicitly saying this character is enough for this
Mhm.
character. This
Right.
character doesn't need to take on anything else, wear any more hats. They can
Mhm.
just be who they are, and like that's okay. That's enough. That's
Mhm.
more than okay. That is celebratory,
Mhm.
And I just feel like so many shows fall into the trap of not making that a part of the story when they have the opportunity.
Right.
And when I see good rep, it is almost always for me a show saying you get to just be who you are, and we love it.
Mhm.
I also really love representation of older queer people who
Mhm.
have like been through it and are over it and would like to live life now.
Mhm. Yes.
And I love stories about older queer people who are like really celebrating their experience, and they still have plenty of opportunities and still get to like go out and get it on and do whatever, and
Mhm.
not yeah, not have to retire to whatever whatever island they think that older people should live on because they're not 20 and have abs.
Right. There was an episode with in The Last of Us. I don't know if you saw that.
No, because I played the video game and it traumatized me. I loved it, and
I
it
love
like
the video game
deeply
too.
wrung me out, and I was just like, I'm not sure if I can watch this show.
Yeah, the show was excellent. There's one episode, one of the characters in the game, Bill, is a minor, I think, character. He's not showcased as much as he is on the show, but we get to see him, and I can't remember the other guy's name that he is with,
Hmm.
but we see them from the time they meet over a course of 10 years. So you see the petty things, you see the very serious things they go through, you see just the straight up fun, you see all of these aspects of their relationship over this period of time. It was probably the best episode, I think. And it was, once again, these shows always have these incredibly touching episodes, but it was, I think, what makes these things so good and so touching is that it's just life, and it's something we can relate to, and that is the thing that makes it stand out to us. But that one was an excellent just love story, and a love story that's not this like teenager high drama story. It was a real years. There's struggle in a relationship that lasts for years, and it's wonderful, depth to relationships that last for years, and that's what you got in that episode. So even though sometimes a whole series or season might not do it for me, there may be that one episode that I say, okay, y'all nailed it on this episode. Yeah.
Yeah. um in that spirit, one of mine is Star Trek DS9 and Jadzia Dax,
Okay.
and particularly the episode where the Trill who is bonded with the same Trill that was married to one of her symbionts previous hosts.
Oh, I think I did see that episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so like it's kind of her meeting her ex-wife, but it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of not because of the nature of Trill society. And I love the fact that it is like intensely controversial that this is happening,
Mm-hmm.
deeply taboo that they would start a relationship again, but not because of the queerness. You know,
Right.
that's another example, I think, of a show really doing a good job of figuring out how to talk about the representation
Mm-hmm.
without making anybody, without going out of their way to remind the viewer that they are experiencing this in their own life already. You
Right.
know,
Right.
I feel like there's something really complex and wonderful there.
Mm-hmm.
And that is also an example of a show acknowledging that like the whirlwind of initial romance may not last, you
Mm-hmm.
know, that there may be uh, the relationships are more complicated than that.
Yeah.
I adore any representation, that like you said is about a long relationship
Mm-hmm.
and doesn't just like have two people fall in love and kiss under the moon and then the credits roll and it's over.
Right.
I'm just not a huge fan of like happily ever after uninterrupted bliss
Yeah.
storylines. I don't like the suggestion of that because that's not what we experience in our
Right.
lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like again it's an important thing to be validated by having a show say sometimes it's just gonna be like, petty and weird, and sometimes you're gonna go to bed mad, you
Yeah.
know?
And it's really, it does people a disservice with the whole you kiss and the credits roll and it's a happily ever after, because they're, especially young people, but even people of different ages, may think this is what relationships are supposed to be. And it's like, no,
Yeah,
that's not what they are. That's not the reality of it. And so, unless you have something where you can see more of a real representation, or you have someone who's explaining things to you, you may fall in the trap of thinking, oh, this is what life is like. And it's no, that's fantasy, or that's a little snapshot of a life,
yeah,
a very brief moment, not, not a long-term relationship. Speaking of relationships, one of the things I really like about The Expanse is that we see different types of relationships. I love
yeah,
the fact that Holden has a bunch of parents.
yeah,
Yeah, and I love the fact that Drummer, her ship, her crew is her family, and she's married to all of them. So I love the poly representation. You rarely see that
yeah,
in shows. And if you do see it, it's a lot of pettiness, or a lot of, it might be a plot point in itself. The drama that's caused with that. And you don't see that at all with The Expanse. These are how lives are, out of necessity. Initially, at least with Holden, it seems to be the fact that you can't have a lot of kids anyway. And all of these adults want this child and want this family. Drummer, it's out of, her crew. These are the people I'm with all the time. And so of course these would be, my relationships. And so I love that represent. I don't think I've seen that on anything else. I can't recall seeing relationships like that. And especially two examples in the same thing, in the same show.
right.
Yeah.
There was an example of a polyamorous marriage in Caprica, but also
Oh.
they were terrorists. So
Okay.
I don't know that that's good representation. Um,
Right.
but it was there.
Okay, well, it was there. I'll have to go back and see Capra. I think I watched maybe the first episode of Caprica.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There is an element of the storyline that's about that. Well,
Oh,
that was
okay.
actually one of my favorite good queer rep stories, shows also though, because there's a character in it who's a mafia hitman who just happens to be gay.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved that he was this like complete badass tattooed monster.
Right.
And he also was gay. Like that really
Yeah.
made me happy. But I remember at the time just being like, yes. Um there's a villain I
Right.
can root for, you know. I in the vein of villains I can root for, I honestly do think that Interview with the Vampire on AMC is
Oh, yes.
fantastic queer rap.
Yes, it
I
is.
love it. They are a
Yes.
total mess. There is absolutely no way in which they are a relationship that people should try to mimic. And it is in some ways so real. And I
Yes.
love that about it.
Mhm.
I love that the Louis family tension does not revolve around the queerness.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's just not what
Mm-hmm.
they're mad about. Um,
Right.
I love
Mm-hmm.
that Lestat is a mean gay.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's so mean and I love it.
Uh-huh.
I love again, there's a multitude of queer identities because Lestat is also actually explicitly pansexual.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I love just like the ways that these characters make us all feel better about ourselves. That's like not, I don't know if that's what they intended, but I feel like any queer
Right.
person can watch this show and be like, you know what, I've really got my stuff together. And
Mm-hmm.
I
It's like,
think that's
at
really
least I'm
valuable.
not that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not that, so I'm doing
Yeah.
pretty good, you know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, and also I just again I love trauma bonded queer fam. I just like
Mm-hmm.
that stuff is very real.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the found family. I love the like forged
Yeah.
world where they have said, okay, we're gonna draw a little boundary around the part of the world that we're gonna live in and be comfortable and safe in, sort of safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be where we make our home. And I really admire that. I really love that.
Yeah, I do too. And I love the intersectionality of that show.
Yeah.
And the fact that that is addressed. Louis is a black man, and at this time period, that makes a difference. So I just love how it's not just glossed over. Um, I'm trying to think, so there are certain characters that I think of. Um, Gosh, I am blanking on her name. This is DC Comics, black woman who basically, especially when we're looking at Suicide Squad, um,
Okay.
ah, whatever her name is, who's the boss, pretty much. I like seeing this middle-aged black woman running things and is not a nice person. She's nobody's grandma.
Yeah.
Okay. She will kill you. I love seeing that a movie that was not a good movie in the sense that they kind of did this character wrong, but I have to admit, I kind of liked it, was the movie Ma, having once again
Ah,
a black middle-aged woman be the bad guy. So we do sometimes want to see ourselves as the villains. Um, Thinking of horror and this particular movie, the characters are kind of stereotypes, but it was so much fun seeing them together. Was the movie The Blackening. When I saw
ah,
that, it made me very much see myself when I was in college or right out of
really?
college. So I could identify with these characters. Yes, these characters had some stereotypical elements to them, but I knew people just like this. And the fact that they were getting what they were doing, why they were getting together, the drama that they were having I knew what I had been in this kind of situation. So I really enjoyed that and enjoyed the fact that they were poking fun at these stereotypes. Um, so I think it's also great to see black people in a horror comedy, because we're either going to be in horror and get killed really quickly, or we're going to be in horror and it's not a lot of fun. The Blackening was a lot of fun. And so we don't have many like that. I appreciated that.
That's awesome. I should we pause since we've got like 10 minutes
Yes. Oh, yeah.
left.
We have 10 minutes. So if anybody has any questions or comments, I am not looking at Discord, so I won't be able to see anything that you
Yeah.
text. But if you would just like to unmic and ask any questions or make any comments, we would love to hear from you.
Hey, I got a question for Michael.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Good Omens TV show that you really like. Is there that kind of representation in the original novel by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, or did they have that for the show?
You can read it in if you choose to, but in the
Right.
book, they are very much friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like Gaiman, if I remember correctly, Gaiman has said that it's something that he and Pratchett talked about at the time as something that they thought would probably be true of these characters, but that they did not think they could get away with including. Because I mean, it was 30 years ago. But if it's in the book, then I don't remember it being explicit. Whereas the show has like really explored this, and I think it's wonderful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There any questions or comments? Or if anybody has a show that you would like to recommend
Oh,
or
totally.
movie, yeah.
If no one else does, I have a question for Donna.
Okay.
What do you feel Lovecraft Country got wrong?
I think their queer representation definitely went very poorly. And the woman who was the showrunner for that did acknowledge that that the queer representation was not done well. And it was something that was somewhat added because that wasn't a part of the book. So
I mean,
she had the opportunity to do it right, since it wasn't like, oh, I have to use just source material, and
Right.
it really wasn't done well.
well, is it the queer character was so dislikable? I mean, I didn't like him, but
Well, they also had a two-spirit person, and so their intersectionality, intersex character was not treated well at all, and was killed by the character who is gay,
Right.
who has, which I wouldn't say that there is no such thing as people disliking the thing that they are.
Right.
But I just think that it could be helpful if you're going to have storylines like this, like with the character who is killed. I just feel like I don't see how that added to the story, added or
Right.
took away. Like it didn't, I didn't see the necessity for that.
I see that.
Yeah, so that's what I really think was done poorly with but I thought a lot with, but I still do like Lovecraft Country a lot.
Oh, I love Lovecraft
Yeah, I
Country.
think it was good. Yeah.
It was great. It's great.
And I think you can like something and acknowledge the fact that, well, this
Mhm.
thing was not done the best. Because I love TNG, but TNG had some flaws.
Right, right. Well, like I said, this is gonna come up to the disability panel. I feel that way all the time about things.
Mhm,
The stuff I love the most is the most problematic.
mhm,
And but yeah, I could see your points about Lovecraft Country, but I enjoyed the show for the most part, and I enjoyed the new spin on the whole mythos thing with the sugars and everything.
mhm. Mhm.
Any other questions?
All right, I guess not.
So some shows that I have not gotten to see,
Okay.
but I either look forward to because they're not out yet, or I really want to watch them,
Mhm.
even though I know that they have already been canceled. I'm really looking forward to Dead Boy Detectives.
Okay. I
Uh,
haven't even heard of that one, so I'll check that off.
okay, so they were really minor characters in the Sandman comics, if I remember correctly.
Oh,
And then
okay.
they show up in um the you just said the name of it like 5 minutes ago. Um
Was it
the
Lovecraft?
superhero team that's
Oh,
that
a Suicide Squad?
no, oh sorry, no, I was thinking of a different one. But they show up in a different superhero comic later. And by that point, it's sort of suggested that the two characters they're boys who died at a boys' school, and they chose not to enter the afterlife, but instead to stick around as ghosts and solve mysteries together.
Oh,
And
wow.
there's a suggestion in their sort of later appearances that at least one of them has feelings for the other. They're not really sure what to do about that. And so I'm going to be really interested to see when the show happens, which is later this month, if they explore that at all. Uh, and then also a show that has been canceled. It only got one season. I don't know if it got any sort of resolution, but it seemed fascinating to me. It's First Kill, about
Oh, okay.
a woman who is a vampire who needs to kill someone to complete her transformation and like join the ranks of her vampire family. And
Oh, I've
she's
heard
in
of
love with a vampire hunter who needs to kill a vampire to like be accepted by her family. And
uh,
so super fascinated by the like super gay drama there. Um,
mhm,
and The Imperfects, which is kind of an X-Men riff.
okay.
It's about three people who were against their will, without their consent, converted into like they were given like gene therapies that were experimental that
Mm,
effectively gave them superpowers,
mhm,
and they are hunting for the person who did this to them. But the team includes apparently some really good, like complex and validating asexual rep, which I find really interesting.
mm,
So I'd really like to see that. And then a cartoon called Q Force about a team of queer super spies and superheroes.
Oh,
I really want
wow.
to see. So,
Yeah,
but I
that
haven't
sounds
had a
great.
chance to watch yet.
Okay. I don't think I have anything. I'm definitely looking forward to the next season of Interview with a Vampire. Last season of Discovery. Um, and I'll probably see trailers here and there, so I'll see, okay. But I'm definitely hoping to see horror this year that features Black people. I love horror. I do want to see myself in the horror and not the first person who is killed.
Yeah,
So, and we're more and more we're seeing people and we're seeing different types of horror. So we're seeing horror coming out of countries in Africa, horror coming out of India, horror coming out of places that we didn't see before. So I'm looking forward to exploring that more. So,
absolutely.
yeah. Well, Michael, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. And now I'm getting ready to find all these shows that you just talked about.
Thank you so much. This was really delightful. I love being a part of VCon. I love Colors of Fandom. So I'm really glad we got to talk.
Oh, me too. Well, you have a great rest of the day. And for anybody else, we will be having panels, watch parties all day. Please check out the schedule that is in the VCon text channel. And we look forward to seeing you all later today.
Yeah.
All right. See you later.
See ya.